Good evening. We're going to get started at our City Council work session. The agenda, we're going to start out with our invocation with Mr. Kenneth Reeves, and then we'll do our Pledge of Allegiance. If you would, please stand with me.
Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight, and we thank you for the opportunity to serve our city. And we ask you to give us wisdom as we go through the budget and help us to get it right and to do the right thing as always, Father. Father, we thank you for your Son that died on that cross and saved our souls and shed that blood for us all, Father. And we thank you for the sun that we had today, and always thank you for the rain, but we appreciate the sun. And Father, we ask you to just bless us as we go through the evening. And again, thank you for that Son that died on that cross. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Councilman Reeves. If you would, please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Okay, we need to set the agenda. Don't think we're going to need to go into closed session tonight, so if there's any other changes, I need a motion to set the agenda. Mr. Craig and Mr. Reeves, all in favor? Okay, motion passes. Consent agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda. If there's any changes, hearing none, I need a motion. Ms. Harris and Mr. Huff, all in favor? Motion passes. We'll go into our presentation, the discussion of the proposed 2024-2025 budget and fee schedule. Ms. Wood, and I think Mr. Blanton's going to help out with that.
Absolutely. Council, before you tonight, you have a draft budget for fiscal year 25. It was provided to you a couple weeks ago, as well as a memo that I'd prepared giving you the highlights. The budget that is before you tonight is balanced. There's no requirement for fund balance to be utilized to fund operating expenses. The fund balance is only being utilized to fund capital cost. This is a decrease from last fiscal year budget due to smaller amounts of capital in certain funds and some allocations that we've made. Ms. Wood and I will be glad to answer any questions that we can tonight, to address any concerns or any tweaks, amendments, or additions that the council would like to see.
Mr. Reeves?
Just had a question about the streets and solid waste, page 67.
Should we get our presentation?
And I think we mentioned in the retreat.
I'm sorry.
I just thought we would have a presentation for staff before we started discussing specific items, but however you want to run it, I guess is okay.
Well, we'll answer Mr. Reeves' question, then we'll go into Ms. Woods. She can go over the overview.
I just had a question. It was mentioned in the retreat that we're going to save money by going to this. Looking at these numbers here, we're spending $1.3 million for it. I just wanted to get a little clarification on that as we go through that, going with the Waste Pro contract.
And Ms. Woods, if you want to, I'm sure you have that on your what you're going to bring up.
Apologize. Thank you, Mayor. We did not do a presentation since Jonathan had went over the brief last meeting and gave the books out, but we were prepared just for any questions, but we didn't do an actual presentation for tonight.
Okay. All right.
And I'll be glad to speak
Yeah,
to
if you want to
Mr.
speak
Reeves'
to that,
question,
Mr.
sure.
Blanton.
In the streets and solid waste budget, the budget for streets and solid waste is proposed to increase by approximately $1.3 million for the upcoming fiscal year. This particular department is reflective of the vote that was taken by the council at the retreat to move forward with contracting out with Waste Pro. The majority of these increases are due to the decision to contract out. This is a substantial cost. In order to be able to contract out, it's going to be an additional cost to the city per each can. The thought process, as I had mentioned last meeting, was that the city would not be budgeting for an additional garbage truck, that we would not be budgeting for additional personnel to account for some of the growth. So the total for that budget is approximately $3.4 million. Certainly we can make tweaks, adjustments, or edit that based on council's direction tonight on how you all would like to move forward.
Mr. Huff?
I was stunned by the numbers. There's a couple things here that concern me, not the least of which the level of customer service that our citizens have grown accustomed to. And you may want to share any feedback you've gotten. I don't, if you've talked to anybody about Waste Pro, but I know some of the challenges that we've had already. And then not just that, but increasing cost on our residents doesn't, to me, set well. 1.3 million could be better utilized elsewhere. I think we should continue to study the problem, study ways to address our street and solid waste challenges. We've got great people, and you know, we need to look at a better way, whether it's more quotes, whether we're meeting with other sanitation companies. But, you know, we need to do a better job of handling the costs on this, because that's just not something we need to be putting on our residents.
Yes, sir.
So I don't know what the consensus will be of council to move away from the current idea of going to Waste Pro immediately. I'm hoping that is the decision, and if we do that, I'd like to see staff bring forward a strategy, and I'd like to see that strategy have some conversation about what is the people plan? You know, what happens to all of those great staff members that have worked so hard for so long? What happens to them? You know, if we do end up contracting the service out, what happens to them? Where do they go? What work do they do? How does that fit for our services to our citizens? To a transition, you know, this seems a little abrupt, even though I know we talked about it in February, but it doesn't feel smooth. It doesn't feel like we have a clear direction on how we're going to move from this. We have no idea what happens to our equipment. We have no idea what happens to our people, and the cost went up. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to get more service. You know, I've got recycling, and you know, if you want to talk to me about what my experience has been there with Waste Pro, I'd be happy to talk to you offline. You know, but I see that as kind of an issue, and as Mr. Huff has pointed out as well, I think a rebid, you know, with some ideas of going and maybe even presenting the information to some of these other potential companies that could do this work, you know, and a savings plan if we do more of a privatization model, where what does it look like if we keep it cost-wise going forward, and what does it look like if we push it out, and what happens to our people? And we just don't seem to know any of those answers. So I'm a lot confused on what it is we're doing, but I know what we do, even though it has some challenges, works. I'd be much more comfortable sticking with that personally.
Any other comments, Mr. Craig?
I kind of agree. Well, I do agree. The number kind of threw me off whenever I saw it. I know a couple months ago when we were talking about this, it did make sense, and I didn't expect to see the big gap in going forward with this. My thoughts, of course, you know, expectations ruins everything, and my expectations was that number being smaller or well, a lot smaller or close to nothing, or saving us money. So I would like to take a little bit more time and see what we can do to actually save more money instead of having that huge gap like that.
I kind of feel the same way. I think we thought we were going to save a bundle of money by switching over and having Waste Pro do this, and it didn't pan out that way. So we need to just probably, as Mr. Huff mentioned, look at getting some different quotes and looking, just kind of holding what we have, and then we can look at this even if it's for another year, and then kind of go from there. But I think, as you mentioned, our level of service is, you know, a big thing for our citizens, and we don't want to spend more money and have less service. Anyone else on this subject, Mr.?
I've got several others, but are we kind of done with the solid waste portion? Does staff have what they need on that, I guess?
Is everybody good with that portion? All right, we'll move on.
Gotcha. So the other one in the budget that caused me pause as well is we've talked about moving to a merit system, and the way that the budget currently reads is that you give out a COLA and then you tack a merit on top of that, and that was never the intent. The intent was to replace the COLA with a merit program. That the hope was that if somebody performed, that they would be able to get something greater than what had just been kind of handed out across the board in the past. So if staff could talk to kind of what I think the term you had used was was it a payment philosophy or a salary philosophy? what is the merit philosophy that we have going forward here, and how do we budget for that? I've got some other comments associated with that once I hear from staff.
And I can,
Blanton?
sure, and I can comment, and certainly staff, if you guys want to jump in. It's my understanding this is the first year, being fiscal year '24, that merit was included back in the budget after many years of that being on a hiatus. It was my understanding that cost of a living was budgeted last year, and then the merit program was evaluated mid-year. Certainly would defer to staff or Ms. Wood if they have additional insight on how this has been done this fiscal year, and of course would defer to council's recommendations on any types of thoughts on tweaking or amending that.
Yes, that's correct. We actually just followed exactly what we done last year, doing the COLA and the merit. This was our first stab at it and our recommendation, but we're welcome to, remove the COLA piece and just keep the merit that we have in place. Like I said, this was just our recommendation.
So
Mr. Meadows?
based on my experience elsewhere, the way this has typically gone is a two-part dance. There is an evaluation of the employees that is not tied to any dollar amount, and there's a ranking system that is developed. I think we've got 1 to 5, I think is the one that we have. You have an idea of who that is and what things look like, and you get an idea where everybody lays out on the landscape, and then you have a budgeted amount for your increase. And you back into kind of, because I don't know who's be vacant, I don't know how many 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, or 5s I'm gonna have in my staffing, so you kind of get an idea what that looks like, and you kind of back in, but there's also a top line that you have with that. Giving people 8% raises is unheard of. And the issue with that is not necessarily that I don't want to give people 8% raises now, but what does that do to the operating fund next year and the following year? Because it compounds each year following that. So that number needs to be controlled. It needs to be driven by the budget, not by some arbitrary percentage that's tied to it. We need to have our staff looking at it and saying, here's what I think is a reasonable amount of money to be doling out to our staff as far as a increase goes. That doesn't appear to be the way that this was approached. I know maybe it's something new and we're figuring out as we go, but 8% is too much to be put in a bucket, especially with 3% of it just being handed out.
Any other questions? Mr. Craig?
Well, just to piggyback off of what Councilman Meadows said, I thought, my understanding of it was too that the COLA and merit were separate. And so I'd definitely like to look into maybe just sticking with the merit instead of having that cost of living going up as well.
Mr. Meadows, anything else?
I think you guys, I got,
No, I think what you also run into is some of the problems that we've had with compression. We do our salary studies, and when you're putting that much increase on top of a COLA, you're gonna run into further issues that we're still trying to address. Critical success factors, ranking employees, having a budget, let's say it's $100,000 and you've got the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, the 5s, they get a certain amount of that. And then that's how it's applied based on a performance-based model of critical success factors in the job. So I don't know what our background is in this program, because as you said, it has not been around for some time. And it may be worthwhile to continue to look at it until we feel comfortable with the process. Because the process right now, I'm not so sure about.
Mr. Meadows?
so the general idea was that, instead of having just a straight across the board, that there would be an average, maybe a little higher than what had been handed out on the cost of living, so you could reward folks that had done well. So instead of just getting 3% and I showed up and I killed it, versus the person who barely showed up, the idea would be that I could make something greater than just what was handed out across the board. So I could kind of earn a standout. And part of the challenge that we have as a group is that we don't know what the norm is going to be. And I've been in situations where the norm was a 3 on a 1 to 5, because the idea was, well, you showed up, did your job, 3 is what they expected. Anything that you got a 3.2 or a 3.4 was great. I've been in other situations where 4.2, 4.3 was great. So until we know what that bias is amongst the subjectivity portion of our objectively applied standards, you kind of don't know, what's going to happen, and you need that distribution before you apply dollars to it. Otherwise, you have no idea what you need to budget for, and we end up budgeting for way more than should be earned. there should be caps and collars on what we're doing as far as the merit program itself goes.
Mr. Reeves?
I guess I'm not quite understanding where some of these numbers are coming from, but I think a lot of what's driving what we're doing is some economic factors we're in trying to retain our employees. And I think if we're not competitive with retaining our employees, somehow, no matter what we come up with, we're going to lose employees to other municipalities around us. And I think that's the reason this was presented like this. Is that correct? So that we got great staff. Thank you for any of you. We got great staff. But was that not some of the concerns that we were looking at or talked about over a period of time? Is why this program was come up like this? And if what I understand, it's a merit system, right? Where they're based on their job performance. Is that?
I can speak to that,
Brand.
Councilman Reeves. It's twofold. In the proposed budget, there is up to a 5% increase for merit, and the second prong of that is a 3.1%
Right,
cost of living adjustment. This was put into the budget, and I talked to Michelle about this and did some research. Council's handled this differently in the past. Different directions has been given based on this. At one point, it was loosely connected to the CPI, I understand, and then of course this merit piece is new for this additional year. So currently, the budget as it stands has a 3.1% cost of living adjustment that would be across the board, and each employee would be individually evaluated and be eligible for anywhere from a 1 to 5% increase as it currently stands. But of course, we'll be glad to make those adjustments based on direction of council.
Mr. Huff?
I think one more piece to that is the salary study that we do in order to stay competitive with other jurisdictions. And then how you give people an opportunity to perform and increase that amount of money. Those employees that perform at an excellent level, and I'd love to call a few names that you guys would know, but that we know perform excellently, get the same amount as maybe somebody who isn't as motivated. Okay, and that's okay, but I think when you're able to reward good performance, it encourages others to perform better. And the feedback you get when you're evaluating employees, when we went away from this and we looked at this about 15, 20 years ago, Danny? Is about right? The concern was the objectivity of the managers who were doing the performance evaluations. And as Mr. Meadows pointed out, you may have one manager that thinks all their people are 5s and another manager that's at a different.
Everybody's a 1.
Right. So, or we've had a council member, you remember, everybody's a 3, you know. So I think that training piece is huge, and that was one of the things. But I think to address Mr. Reeves's question, in total, would be we've done a lot of work, the staff has done a lot of work to get these numbers that we can have in a salary study to make sure our people are paid competitively.
I'd also like to add to that too. So over time, not only have we put programs in place, I think, for fire and police to address various entry-level positions and put in place, if I do X, Y, and Z after I'm hired, then there's an increase. We've given one-time deals that we've handed out during COVID, where we did bonuses that were one-time along the way. So as we go, the reason the CPI came about was that it was just a 3% across the board, and once upon a time, inflation was only about 1.1, 1.2. So we tried to put a policy in place that guided that. Now with CPI ended up in the 6 and 7%, you had to go, oh, hold on a minute. We can't afford that. The same thing we were just talking about is that this is an annual budget, but it grows upon itself. And if you don't manage it properly today, it'll come back and bite you tomorrow. So what I was trying to point out is we've had one-time bonuses, we've had salary studies, and we've done annual increases, all of which have kept our people competitive and have done our best to keep people who want to stay.
Anyone else?
I've got more.
Okay, what's next?
So one of the things we've talked about is a self-funding of our insurance program, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but what I'd like to have staff come back to us with is a strategy around this as well. There's been talk about savings and and so forth. So I'd like to know, one, how are those savings going to be derived? What are the origins? Where are they coming from? I've heard drug rebates. I've heard premium rebates. I've heard negotiated costs for services. I don't know what all those look like. And I'd also like to have an idea. I think we talked last meeting a little bit about maybe having, in addition to One Digital, a consultant to help with this transition internally, that somebody that have boots on the ground internally to work with One Digital to make sure that we're putting forward the right processes and right procedures to make sure that, I think for our employees, it should be a fairly similar, kind of interface. But I think for staff on the backside, there's going to be a little difference in that I just don't collect a premium, turn it over to a carrier, and I'm done. There's going to be more to it than that, and we need to develop those systems and make sure that we're carrying those out. So I'd like to have some idea of what is our transition plan. I know we're transitioning. We've already voted on that, but what does that look like? How are we going to put the savings? Where are we going to put that? How are we going to tag that money to make sure that it's there? One of the things that I don't think any of us knows is we've got a baseline of insurance. We've got a lot of data that says we're in a pretty good place right now. As we all know, that could change. We do have reinsurance, is what I've always been taught that it's called, or loss, stop loss, whatever you want to call it. So there is a place between, where we know we are and what we could be exposed to that we would have to cover potentially. That was always invisible to us for somebody else. Now it's going to be visible. What does that number look like? Well, none of us can guess that, and I would rather see us start today with kind of knowns and certain processes and procedures that everybody's familiar with. I've always paid X premium. If I'm continuing to pay X premium, I'm provided a certain level of service. That money goes into a reserve in the background, and at some point, that can become a wellness program. It can become a rebate. It can become a lot of different things once we have a better idea what we're working with. I think what we're going to find based on other reinsurance programs, I think the 90% of clients for our consultant who helps us pick our insurance go with self-insurance is that, it's going to go probably better than we all are afraid that it will, because everybody's a little afraid of uncertainty, and I get that. So how do we do that? How do we put a system in place to have a backstop to cover that from premium to stop loss if it occurs?
Mr. Huff?
What he's referring to is max funding, and really what you would do is keep everything like it is today as if you were going to be fully insured. And you max fund the claims in your reserve, especially in year 1 and 2, to backfill any potential issues if they were to arise. And understanding if you were still fully insured and you had a bad year, well, you're going to go up there too. All right. So, but you're not going to enjoy savings where right now, being fully insured, you're overpaying $300,000. They're not giving you any savings back. Right. They're keeping that and subsidizing somebody else. Mm-hmm. So there are safeguards in place. I would just say that there's a way to max fund it, and that's the most conservative way to go, which I would think that's the way that the staff is going to be advised to go. And then as you go along with more experience, you'll have it. Again, if we don't go this year, if we weren't, you're going to lose all this data because Aetna's not going to provide it going forward. The employees are not going to see one bit of difference. It's just in your first couple months, you're going to see costs are going to be really low. And then it'll start building toward a more normal cost structure. But you can set your premiums just like they are today. You don't have to change a thing. And then that way you would feel more comfortable by max funding it.
All right, so staff's good on that, right?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. We actually have our kickoff meeting with One Digital tomorrow to discuss the transition plan going forward, talking about that maximum cost of that being $289,000 in savings, and then budgeting a bit more than that in order to start building that reserve in order to make sure that we're in a good spot going forward. But staff will certainly update council on the progress that is being made and what that plan looks like moving forward once we meet with One Digital over the next few weeks.
Mr. Meadows.
This one's relatively short, Mr. Mayor. I'm kind of curious why we don't have an org chart in our budget, and would like to see one. I think I've been accustomed to generally in a budget. I don't know why I've never really asked about it before, but I kind of have no idea how we're structured. I'm used to seeing those kind of in two different forms, one with just positions and then another one with the names by the positions, so we can kind of see, how many are in each department and kind of what a structure looks like and who's responsible for what. That isn't in the book, and I think that's something that's kind of key for folks to have a visual to see.
And we're working on that. I directed staff today to
Okay.
update the organization chart based on some proposed changes, so we should have that relatively soon.
All right. What's next?
The controversial one I bring up on a regular basis, I'd like to see us move away from the longevity program and move to a bonus program that is driven by goals that are set by the city manager and the amount set by the city manager. The way I'd love to see this go is that whoever has whatever they have with the longevity program currently, that actually amount would be moved into their base salary. So from this point on, even if I'm maxed out, anytime I got a raise, I'd actually be getting more than I used to get from that, and we can structure this to where it comes in at the same time as the old longevity program used to pay out. I think it was that right around Thanksgiving, kind of as a Christmas bonus for lack of a better term, and that the city manager could set this amount. It'd be very similar to what we talked about earlier during COVID. We gave a one-time bonus to everybody. Generally, the way those work is it is an amount, and there's usually some kind of either budget savings or attendance record, or we get really good on safety, those kinds of things where there would be a bonus tied to that the city manager actually kind of has talked about. I've talked to Ms. Woods about this, and her response was that the budget item would not change much if we went with a bonus program versus the longevity program. And I've said this publicly multiple times. We've talked about it tonight. I think folks should earn this, and if we had a bonus program that's tied to a goal that we're achieving, you're earning it. I've been here the longest, therefore I get the biggest bonus. It just doesn't set well with me. So philosophically, we're talking about having a pay philosophy. I'd like to see that change. I may be the Lone Ranger, but I'd like to see that changed.
Anyone else on that subject?
Well, I talk to a lot of employees, and they don't want to see that happen. So I'm against taking that away from them.
I think we need to, I think it'd be a good, sorry.
Mr. Reeves?
I think it'd be a good idea to maybe talk to our employees on a survey type basis on how they feel about, I think we need to get their input on how they feel about which structure they like best, because I've been involved in both what he's talking about and longevity, okay? There's always a problem with either way you go in my history of being in the car business and the management side of it. There was always a problem. Somebody didn't get what they thought they should have got, but it was based on how long they'd been there, and it was just a flat thing, okay? And they always strived to work and do a better job and be there and continue to be there. We had employees unheard of in the car business that worked there 25 years, 15 years, 50 years. I was 50 years because we had long-term longevity things. So I think we need to probably talk to our employees and find out, how do you feel about these two proposals and what does it mean to you? Because we are talking about dealing with their paycheck. And I think their input is very valuable to what we decide up here. It's just my feeling with that.
Mr. Craig?
So I know last time it was brought up that I was opposed. I like the longevity because I've lived it. I've also talked to some people as well. At the same time, I would like to hear a little bit more in detail of the breakdown. And also, I think last time it was brought up as well about asking the people, the staff, what they would like. Because, of course, you don't want to do something and go away from the majority. So,
Save money.
right, exactly. So, I'm still geared towards where it's at right now, but at the same time, I am open to hearing a little bit more and potentially talking to the staff to hear maybe just like a blind survey or something where they can comment as well.
Mr. Meadows? Or Ms. Shoemaker?
I was actually just going to say that I don't disagree. I think finding out what staff wants is important. I also think it's really important that there be a little bit of an education portion to it, because I think a lot of people knee-jerk and say, no, I don't want something different. But for a lot of people, this will actually increase their base pay. And so, yeah, would you rather make more money throughout the entire year or get a bonus check? And you might actually make more throughout the year. So I think it's important that people understand that it's not like you're taking a bonus away, but you actually would be making more money this year and going forward continuously, rather than just getting a one-time bonus for whatever. This would actually, what Councilman Meadows is actually proposing is that it be rolled into someone's base salary, which means that it would stay with them year after year and be progressive, whereas, you know, a one-time, like, longevity payment is actually, you know, it's really nice. I mean, it's really nice to have, we all love bonuses. Who doesn't love a check, right? But it actually, technically, over time is more of a benefit. So I know that it's been kind of a question in the past, but actually what Councilman Meadows is suggesting is actually of more benefit to employees. It's actually more salary for everyone. But, you know, but again, I think that Councilman Reeves is correct. I mean, if people fundamentally do not like the idea, even if it means they're making more money, then continue with the program as is. I just, I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, but I think it's important that we have some education around it, that
Well-
it's not an attempt to take something away. It's actually an attempt to give more stably over a long period of time, but.
Right. Mr. Meadows?
That was exactly what I was going, I'm all for if we want to do some sort of a survey, but going out today and saying, do you want longevity or not, and you want to replace it with a bonus program, they're going to say longevity because they know what it is. And what I'm actually proposing is not an either or, it's an and both. You know, if, right now it's capped at what, $1,000? So it doesn't matter how long I've been here, if I've been here for however long and I've gotten to that $1,000 mark, I'm capped. What I'm proposing is that goes into your base pay, and if you isolate the $1,000, if they get 3%, 4%, 5% this year, you know, it's 1,000 plus the 3%. Next year, it's the 1,000 plus the 3% plus whatever, you know, the next raise is going forward. You're not taking away from anybody who's here, anybody that's been in place. Now, anybody on the street who's coming in would not get that program because it would be sunset, but it would be replaced with a bonus program. So anybody that's been here for any length of time will get both. You'll have whatever the manager decides is an appropriate bonus program. I have no idea. I've tried to leave that to the discretion of the manager of what goals they wanted to serve and how much that would be. When I worked at the city of Charlotte, it was anywhere from $500 to $1,000 that you got depending on what the budget looked like. So, I mean, in some cases, you could find yourself, if I was getting the 1,000 could be growing within my base pay, paid out as I go through the year, and I could see another $1,000 check based on my past experience. So, just to be clear, I'm not trying to take anything away. I just think that bonuses should be earned, not just handed out because I've been here the longest. But I don't want to take what somebody's earned over time through a program away from them.
All right. Yes, sir, Mr.
Yeah,
Craig.
I absolutely love the educational part to it because sometimes people don't understand that. But at the same time, also I think about whenever I got that longevity check, like in December or November or December, whenever it was, and being real with you, majority of people don't save their money well. And so having that check at the end of the year and no one looking forward to it at that time of the year is a crucial part. So, I mean, I think that's a huge part in itself. That's why people like it.
Ms. Shoemaker?
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, along the same lines, people do the same thing with their federal taxes, right? Like, it actually makes more financial sense to not, you know, to like not have so much money come back to you in a check, but who doesn't love getting a big check from the government, you know? So it's actually, you're financially better off having the money sit in your own account earning interest than sitting someplace else and then being given back to you with no interest. Like, if you had kept it the whole year, you'd be better off, but who doesn't love a giant check, so. I can understand both
Mr.
sides.
Reeves?
Yeah, I like the education part because when you're talking to an employee and if you lay it all out there where they can see exactly what it's gonna change, that's what we need to do anytime we do a change like that, just so, you know, like you said, Mr. Meadows, we gotta show them, you're gonna make more money this way. I'm always for making more money, but we need to make sure that's how it works and that's how they see it. And so that they understand it that way, you know, and I'm like, Mr. Craig, I love them bonuses because I didn't budget well sometimes, or something came up. But as long as we're doing the educational part of it and they understand everything that they're getting, I think it's a great way to go. But they need to know in dollars and cents how it's going to affect them, not just here it is.
So I think if we give do the educational part and let them know how this can work and, you know, allow them to make a decision, get their input. That's the biggest thing, the employees' input. I think that's what we need to do.
I agree with
So,
that.
Mr. Blanton, you've got your direction on that?
Let me just recap to ensure that I understand correctly. As far as longevity goes, and Mr. Meadows, please jump in if I'm misquoting what you were saying. If we move forward, this year longevity would be bonused for. That amount would be allocated across all employees that would be eligible for the longevity pay for this fiscal year. There would be a separate bucket of money, discretionary funds, that would be divvied up based not on longevity alone, but other performance factors that it would be tied to. Going into the second year, longevity would be sunset. There would be no longevity pay. They would get that one-time allocation that is split across their salary this one time. The following year, it would be that bonus pay that's tied to specific performance measures.
We would need to talk about the transition because there hasn't been a bonus program established. The intent is for there still to be a payment in November that mimicked the longevity.
Right.
The idea is that anything that I had earned for longevity would be rolled into my base pay, not paid out as a one-time. So it's to replace it with a bonus program that pays out at the same time that it was last time. I did a poor job last time of explaining the replacement. It came across as if you were going to just eliminate it. It was never my intent. So it would take, if I had the $1,000 and I'd earned that and I'd been here at the top line of that, that $1,000 would go into my base pay. So from that point forward, anytime that I got a pay raise, that $1,000 was in my base, and I'm getting that percentage above that, and it compounds over time. So I'm actually getting more for the longer I stay, plus I would get the one-time deal. So if you do the math, and this shouldn't be too hard with 100 and something employees, you could actually sit down and figure out where everybody was, have one column, here's your pay, second column, here's your longevity, here's the next 3 years of what that looks like if you got nothing else other than a 3% raise, whatever that average was. You could see what that number looks like, and I could go with that. And you could do another column that says, here's the one-time payment, and it would show you what the math looks like. Here's where you are today, and if we kept it as it is, you're gonna get X dollars. Your pay is 20 plus 2, and you get 22 that year. Next year, if you've got 20 and a half plus 2, it's 22 and a half. You could actually show the progression. And last time I checked, compound interest says that if I have more in my base, I'll make more over time. And you would get the one-time payment that would be replaced. It was based on a goal. How did we achieve something? You received 97% of your budget, you stayed within, or we had the safety awards, or we had attendance, or the things that come to mind. Those are the things I have seen before.
One last thing, Mr. Mayor, is, and this is a question because I know this is the way it used to be, but if you get a bonus, it's taxed at a higher amount. So is that, it's not anymore?
It is taxed at a higher amount, but what we do is we do it in a separate payroll, not tied to, so it's not as big of a hit.
But it is regardless. If I make $20,000 a year, I'm taxed at a certain rate. If I get a bonus check, they pretend that that's what you get all the time, so you're taxed at a higher rate. So you get less money that way. But Mr. Meadows has something. I'm curious.
If I have a large bonus and I get it all in one check and it's tied to my regular check, if I were getting a $3,000 check and I got a bonus that was $3,000, they would act as if I got $6,000 every time. The way that staff has done this is they run their regular payroll, so it gets taxed at its normal rate, and then they run the $1,000 and it gets taxed as if you were in the $1,000 or the $12,000 rate. Now, you're trading money either way.
Right.
Michelle and I actually talked about this the other day, and that most people don't pay attention. They look at that top line and they're done. I got 700 of the 1,000 they gave me, and let's go to the races and spend the money or whatever I'm gonna spend it on, right? You're gonna pay taxes on that at the end of the year when you do your taxes. But as Ms. Shoemaker pointed out, a lot of people run their taxes in a way that they're playing for a refund anyway, so the chances of them seeing much of a difference or noticing a difference, the way that staff manages this is low, because it gets at what Mr. Craig has talked about. It's kind of has become traditionally a Christmas fund. It's the family Christmas that comes out at November-ish, where that goes, mama or daddy, whoever's the one that runs the Christmas fund, says this is going on Christmas presents, right? That's kind of how it runs. That's what we've learned and heard. So, but yeah, it does have a tax impact, but it's not run the way it's happened to me before, where if you got the bigger bonus and they put it in and they take over half of it, and you actually don't see that back until tax time, when you may not have planned your taxes that way.
Anything else? Mr. Meadows?
Sorry. So I'm looking at staff on this one, and the budget amount year over year. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the last year and this year and kind of what the totals look like? And if you could weave into that conversation a little bit about the philosophy we have approached with capital funds versus operating funds, and kind of how the operating funds have an underlying, kind of gentle upward trend, and how the total budget, because of capital outlay, goes up and down from one year to the next.
Sure, I can, and then Michelle, if you want to jump in. Looking from fiscal year 24 to 25, as I was saying earlier, there are additional, different amounts of capital projects that have been funded. It was important, and I asked Michelle about this several times, that we ensure that fund balance is not being utilized for operating costs, and that this budget is only using the fund balance for capital projects. It fluctuates, of course, year to year, the overall size of the budget based on the projects that we're funding and the degree of fund balance that we're utilizing. For example, for fiscal year 25, we had 5.4 million proposed as to 10 million last year. Or do I have that backwards, Michelle?
That's correct.
Okay, so it would be based on the capital improvement plan that the council has adopted, how much that capital project fund would fluctuate year to year. But it is important to note that the proposed budget does not use any fund balance to fund operating costs. And Michelle, if there's anything you want to.
In the 2 million and 5 million is on the enterprise. One big decrease on the general fund side, in fiscal year 23, the ARPA funds rolled to fund balance. And then this fiscal year, we budgeted to pull it out of fund balance and transfer it to the, capital project. So that's the big decrease in the general side. The capital didn't really, fluctuate a whole lot on the general fund side.
Mr. Meadows?
This is, I don't normally like being on the negative side, but I'm quite frankly disappointed that there was nothing put up on the screens for the public to see. I know I got this book myself, and we're talking about stuff that we have studied and we have seen, but those sitting in the audience have no idea what we're talking about. They've got no reference to go back to in the public record. So what I would like to do to kind of rectify that, if we can, is when we go to the public hearing for the budget, I would like to see some overview. There's a nice summary page. You're going to be making some adjustments, but some of the work that's been done here, I'd love to see displayed for the public to see. A lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of good information in here that's going on. So I'd like to see a presentation. Part of that presentation, we've had multiple public comments about our capital fund and how we've managed that, the unassigned fund balance. I'd love to see what we have seen multiple times, which is the top line number looks kind of like, oh my, that's huge. But when you take out the state amount that's required, you take out what's actually required to do our day-to-day based on collections, you take that out, you take the number of our, the water tower, you take the bridge over Dutchman's Creek, you take the road connector that's tied to $650 million worth of economic development. Out of that number, it suddenly gets down to a number where you go, oh, hold on, we're going to stop spending, on capital projects and start scratching our head a little bit about how we create funds to do capital projects that our citizens want to see done and some that we have to do as far as sewer, water, and all that kind of stuff. I think that it's important to, as we talked about educating our employees, I think it's also important to educate our public. And right now, I don't know how, if I were sitting out there, I'd have any idea what we're talking about. I'm a little disappointed that we went about that way. It's a little different than we've ever done that. So I'd like to see us maybe take what we've had here, boil it down, bring it back the next time, and present it to the public and actually see it. And it'll be part of the public record.
Sure, I can figure that. And Councilman Meadows, I apologize for that. Michelle and I talked about this, and I advised that we would get input from council prior to making a budget brief or presentation. Last Thursday and Friday, we talked about finalizing the information with council tonight, putting together a couple-page summary with budget briefs with graphics showing where the pennies go, similar to what's been done in years past. So that is a conversation that we had last Thursday and Friday, and we will certainly ensure that we have that leading up to the June 10th public hearing, giving the public ample enough time to review. The budget is on our website. We posted the budget to our website. I had several requests for the budget that I fulfilled over the past couple of weeks, but certainly I do apologize that we did not have a formal presentation tonight. Michelle and I did talk about that, and I advised that we should wait until such time that these numbers were finalized before presenting them in a more formal fashion, but we will certainly rectify that, and I will have more information ready for presentation at the public hearing.
So while I appreciate the opportunity to have input, it's a little chicken before the egg, so, I'll be honest with you, from my own experience, even though I go through and read this, oftentimes when staff has done the presentation and does the narrative, I learn something that maybe I didn't know, or something strikes me that I didn't catch in my own reading, because an auditory response versus a visual response versus me reading and comprehending what is secondhand for you guys, that piece was missing for me. I brought my own set of questions, as you can see, but some of these might have been answered in a presentation. I wouldn't have had to ask them, or I might have adjusted them based on something that I learned in the presentation. So flying a little bit blind is my opinion. But thank you for the response. I'm done.
Anything else, Mr. Huff?
So I don't want to oversimplify this, because it's more complicated than I'm going to make it, try not to make it sound. But 1.3 million, we decide not to go forward with Waste Pro. That's a significant amount of money. That's 3.5 cents on the tax rate. I would like staff to evaluate that and the impact, because there will be expenses potentially that we didn't plan for because we were going forward with Waste Pro until tonight. So street and solid waste, there may be some expenses there, maybe not that total savings, but I think that we need to continue to look at, reducing our tax rate as we continue to grow our business base that we have, and the investment Mr. Meadows has referred to, we know is continuing to come to Mount Holly and take more pressure off of our residents and the tax rate. So I don't want to oversimplify it. I don't want people to misunderstand, but I do believe that we need to look at every opportunity to do that.
Mr. Meadows?
So my question to staff is, how much of the CIP are we actually funding in this round? What percentage of it are we funding?
And Michelle, please correct me if I'm wrong, but looking at the general fund for 25-26 in the capital improvement fund, we're looking at roughly 3.9 million. Looking at the appendix for the tab and the budget.
And what's the next year's capital improvement call for?
In general fund, Ms. Meadows is 1.4 million and some change.
So we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot is where I was going with that. And if I take the pennies off this year, some of those economic development projects, as an example, the $18 million that we spent on water and sewer being extended from exit 27 back down to Tuck, and the $3 million we set aside for the connector road, none of that development would be happening had we not done that. And I don't know the debt service on top of my head, but that's a couple $100,000 a year we're paying in debt service for that, right? So I get a little nervous about, we've got the plan for this development, and yes, I believe that the commercial rate will benefit us, and that the commercial properties will protect the residential rate. But if we don't have the money and the capital in place, which I think when we do the exercise where we look at the unassigned fund balance, you're going to find that after the Dustman's Creek Bridge and the water tower and the road, it gets skinny. We're down to only having, instead of this, 90-ish% that we've been carrying that looks like a lot more than it probably is after capital gets expended, it's going to pull back to more like 60, 55% of budget. And I think, if I remember correctly, you need 35 to 40% just to keep the bills going based on the way that the property tax comes in, the vehicle tax, and the one-time property tax. The two property taxes. You've got the vehicle tax, and so you get the idea. It's not an even, hey, we get $20 a month and we spend $20 a month. So we've got to have money to cover that float. So I get nervous when we start talking about that. Now, when we have the revaluation and there's an increase in the value and you pull back, I understand that one, but I don't think anybody here is going to have any taste for raising our tax rate without a revaluation. Raising. He's proposing the idea that instead of 40.5, that we pull back to 38 or 39 because of one item in the budget. And I'm saying, well, that's one item comes out of the budget, but there's a bunch of items that we have listed that we should be doing that we can't. And if we pull back to 38 or 39 next year, if we need that money, nobody's going to raise their hand to go back to 40.5. Right. That's my concern.
Anything else? Mr. Blanton?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, I want to recap, because I appreciate what Councilman Huff was saying, that Clear consensus of council is that we're going to forego the contract with Waste Pro. Is that correct? Okay. I will certainly work with Director Walker, and we will ensure that we have the budgeted tweak, because there will be additional costs that will have to come from this. For example, we lowered the tipping fees from $229,000 this fiscal year to $100,000 for next fiscal year. So there will be some adjustments. So the budget will not be decreasing in the streets and solid waste department by $1.3 million. There will be additional costs that needs to be raised.
I'm sorry, Ms. Shoemaker?
Yeah, and I mean, at the retreat, you know, to me, it was a no-brainer based on the information that we received that we would go with Waste Pro because of issues with hiring additional personnel, you know, people retiring. Like it wasn't just about the money, but it was also about like every one of our trucks basically has to be replaced. Every one of them is past their normal lifespan. So we're at risk of having to spend a tremendous amount of capital. So I completely concur that like the jump in price was shocking, and I agree that we need to evaluate it. But I would say quite frankly, if you guys crunched the numbers and came back and said it's going to cost us the same amount or more to keep it in house, because I think that like there is more hiring, there is more stuff that's going on, and maybe the offsets, or like maybe the number looks surprising, but the offsets really don't make sense. So I do think that the customer service part is a humongous part, and maybe it's not Waste Pro, maybe we need to examine this and look to see if there's alternatives. Not to say there's anything necessarily wrong with Waste Pro, but if we have concerns, I don't want to see us like say we're totally against going in this direction, because I know that you know Director Walker made a very solid argument to us about why this was a need for that department. So I don't want to ignore that completely. I just think that we need to maybe like take a moment to check ourselves to see if this is really the right thing. So, because really the way the numbers hashed out wasn't exactly the way we expected. So I'm not really necessarily for or against specifically, but I think that I would like to just kind of do a double take on this one and see what the numbers would look like if we kept it in-house versus doing something else. But
Ms. Harris?
I agree with you 100%, that we need to look at it. He did give us a great presentation.
Very solid.
Yes.
Very solid, like many reasons. It wasn't just one financial there's a lot of reasons there. So.
Mr. Meadows?
So in the budget, you had 4 positions eliminated. You probably need to look at those as well. And there was a lot of discussion around this, so I don't want to go back through it, but could you read back to us what you think your stead or your charge is around this topic?
The charge?
So what are you doing going forward? Because we talked about a strategy, and I'm hearing some conversation that kind of makes me pause, and that I think we address some of that, because I don't think that this is necessarily, we're not ever going private. I think it's, we don't understand enough right this minute, and we want to evaluate it over the next 3 to 6 months. So I guess my other question would be is, this could change mid-year. It doesn't have to necessarily be at budget time. Is that correct?
Sure. And that was going to be my recommendation, Mr. Meadows. I see that there's hesitation with the council with moving forward currently. We can re-advertise this contract throughout the fall, hopefully get more than one bid as we did this last go-around, and we can reevaluate mid-year. You were asking about the numbers, Mr. Meadows. Currently, we are charging $7.10 per month for garbage pickup. That it was not recommended that would change in the upcoming fiscal year. So for fiscal year 25, roughly it's costing us $41.64 per home per month. Taking out that $7.10, we're subsidizing out of the general fund $34.54 roughly currently as it stands. With Waste Pro, there would of course be a difference in that. So it would certainly be that we would still be subsidizing this cost out of the general fund. So I can certainly, my recommendation would be we pause, we look at this throughout the late summer, early fall, put it out to bid again to see what we can do, and then continue as is if that's the desire of the council until such time that we have more information to evaluate.
So, and I maybe shouldn't do this publicly, but to date, I still don't understand the presentation that was given at the retreat, and I've called 2 or 3 times. I can't track with the numbers. I too thought that there would be some offsets, and the 1.3 million threw me off, and I still can't figure out how we needed 21 positions to cover the whole city 5 days a week and only lose 4 and pick up a new deal and all those folks are gonna have something to do. And there's more questions I could ask, but I won't, but I just have more questions than I can answer. You know, if staff can get those numbers to where we understand them and we can follow the numbers, then you might get a different response. Right now, I'm confused.
Anything else on that? Mr. Blunt, you wanna-
Sure. And consensus of council is we will tweak the budget to take out the contracted costs for street and solid waste and plan to continue sanitation in-house currently.
Mr. Craig?
And also, I guess, I'd say if you didn't already have this down about looking into the cost of keeping it in-house and what it would be to add those additional 1 or 2 trucks as well, that would be good to know for going forward.
All right, Mr. Reeves?
And I'm like Mr. Meadows, I was slightly confused also. And like Mr. Craig said, we need to look at a comparison of what it's gonna cost if we stay in-house and keep the truck and keep the system going over the long period of time, because this Waste Pro contract, from what I understand, it'll be the same thing every year, and we'll have no more control over it. And that concerns me that next year, hey, we're not charging you enough, and we keep going up and up and up. And then all of a sudden, we look at this like, this is costing us a whole lot more than what we could have done it ourselves. That's the part I'm not understanding, how far out we've looked at this, you know, and how we've looked at it, done the comparison. Like, you know, everybody's wanting to do the comparison, like Ms. Shoemaker said, we need to see this, how it plays out over a period of time.
Well, like Mr. Blanton said, we'll just pause and do a little bit more research and get some more numbers, and we'll just kind of go from there. If it takes us till fall or till winter, we got to do what's best for our citizens.
And Mr. Mayor, for purpose, and I appreciate this feedback, council, thank you. I will certainly make sure that we have this information presented, that we can take a comparison cost approach to this. But just to be clear, for now, moving forward into the June 10th public hearing on the budget, the draft budget for fiscal year 25 will include in-house garbage pickup, not the Waste Pro contract, correct? Correct. And I just had a couple more, Mr. Mayor, to be sure. Also, based on the direction feedback of council, we are going to be removing the COLA amount of 3.10% from the recommended budget and moving forward with only the 5% merit. Is that the consensus of council as well for the proposed budget leading into the June 10th hearing? We would remove the COLA of 3.1%, but keep the merit of 5%.
Mr. Meadows?
I think it's a little more sophisticated than that. I don't think you have a bucket or need a bucket of 8%. I think what you need to do is look at what your distribution is, you know, and get an idea of what that number looks like as far as if I were to give, you know, if the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s equal percentages, which is not necessarily the way that it always goes, you need to back into what would it look like, you know, if I gave everybody the percentage of whatever number they got, and see what that number looks like, and then look at what you have available in your budget and get an idea of how much money you're going to have available. Because usually vacant positions are included in that as well, you know, because they could be full. You know, so you need to look at a full boat and get an idea. What generally had happened in my experience, as I said before, was that you did the evaluations first, and then you looked at what amount of money did you have available in your budget, and then you set your percentages accordingly. So it was a spreadsheet that basically backed into how much money you had to work with. So having not done it, we don't have kind of our North Star today. You know, you would usually have, after you do it the first time, okay, I've got an amount, you know, and then I've had this many positions added, and I'm looking at this kind of increase and get an idea what that number looks like. So I don't know that it's just a straight 5%. You know, it could be more than that for some people. It could be less than that for some people. I don't know if I'm making sense to you or not in this setting, but, you know.
I'm just,
I feel like that provides any direction.
for budgeting purposes, what are we looking at wanting to provide? Because I know that there was discussion about perhaps removing the 3%, categorizing it as COLA. Not everyone would get 3% come July 1. Are we looking at a larger amount to perhaps back into for merit-wise that would be allocated on a case-by-case basis? Just for budgeting purposes, why I'm drilling down on this to ensure that we have accurate numbers in the budget leading into the June 10th hearing.
Mr. Huff?
I just get the feeling we're not ready for that. I mean, I think we need to do it, but we got 3 weeks, and we could go with 8% as a budget and then work on the merit system. Okay, I mean, you could do that, but I'm concerned that, I mean, that's a lot. What you just said is not an overnight, let's do it. If we're ready for the merit system, where we're ready for the evaluation process, the ranking process, and understanding how to allocate the money, okay. But I have a gut feel on this, and just listening to the conversation, how do we know what to budget? And that's difficult.
They already been through sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
We've already been through the evaluation process? You already know what everybody's ranked, right?
Correct.
And they actually gave out percentage increases
Okay.
mid-year. So I guess I stand corrected in that you have some idea what you spent on a merit program this last time around, and you can evaluate that. You could go through and say, we gave, this average percentage, and look at that. Now, you had that times 2 because you had the 3% or whatever we had in the budget last year. I don't recall that off the top of my head, plus the merit on top of it this last time around, but that was your transition year. So you should be able to look at your list, so they do have a baseline.
Okay.
And see, if that was 2% or 3%, you might want to make it 4 or 5% so you can make sure you stay within inside of it. I mean, the most conservative thing to be, given the confusion that maybe I've created here today, is budget it at 8%, figure out what it is, and report back to council what that number is going to be. And just for the record, while this is complicated sounding, this is standard operating procedure across multiple industries. So this isn't like muddying the waters and making this difficult for us. This is what every other organization does that has a merit increase program.
If you've done it, that's all I'm saying. If you haven't done it, it can be a little daunting, but it sounds like you're already started. You know you have one. I wasn't aware of that. So that gives you a starting point. And, 8%. I'm good with 8% budget. Let's see what that looks like. If that's satisfactory, look at it. I think it's a good number to start with.
As long as we take care of our employees, that's all that matters in the end. We've just got to, figure out what's going to be the best route to go and take care of our employees.
Amen, brother.
It's pretty simple.
And I'm like you, I'm good with the 8%.
Yeah.
I think we just need to leave it alone and then work this process and take care of it.
Do you have direction?
Well, just one point of clarification. I apologize, Council, to make sure that I understand. We're saying 8%, that being each employee would be eligible up to 8%, anywhere from 1 to 8 with no COLA increase.
No. Okay, 8% is a number.
Right.
Okay, whatever that number is in a department, that's the budget for that department. It's not, I'm gonna give somebody 2 and 6 and 3. It's a bucket of money that I take and I divvy out based on performance of those ranked and stacked. Okay? And so what I'm saying 8%, whatever that dollar amount 8% comes to is what I'm referring to. Does that?
I'll try if I'm allowed. Can't try
Mr.
to
Reeves?
No, I'm understanding, whatever we have there now is what we're saying. Are we in agreement? That's what we need to go with until we can figure this out?
So it's a top line number, so we'll put it in numbers I can handle. If you have $100, we're saying you're gonna take $8 and set it aside as a bucket of money available for increases. We're not saying that you're gonna give out the whole bucket. We're saying you need to go back and evaluate, what did you give out this past time around? What did that equal? Is that a number that's, is it above 3%, below 3%? Is it a number you're comfortable with? Maybe you were shooting for 4.5%. We've always said we kind of wanted something to go to employees that were performing that was greater than the 3%. It takes a little bit of work. I can't sit here and tell you the dollar amount is $23.43, but I can tell you, you got $100 to work with, and I'm asking you to come back and tell me it's $23.40 or it's $43.50 is what we decided is the average that we're going to give to all our employees. And once you have a couple of baselines, next year's budget, you come forward and you say, based on our merit program, we typically give out about 4.5%, 5%. I need 5% in a bucket that I can distribute to my employees. which is greater than the 3% that used to be given out. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, Mr. Meadows. We will evaluate and we'll come back and make sure that we make that work in the upcoming fiscal year budget. Those were the only point of clarifications that I had, Mr. Mayor. I think we have clear direction on that.
Okay, so you want to do your manager report?
Yes, sir. I just have a few things for the council and the public tonight. Number one, Memorial Day will be this coming Monday. City Hall will be closed. Certainly encourage everyone to enjoy time with their family and be safe. We will be back here on June 10th for the public hearing on the budget. At that time, there will be information that has been circulated to the public on the website, and certainly if you have any questions as we move forward, please reach out to town staff and we'll be glad to help. I am also excited to announce that the first sculpture with our Leased Art program was unveiled today. The artist is Charles Pilkey, and that was installed today at Catawba Heights Park. So certainly encourage everyone to stop by, check that out, and stay tuned for the second unveiling that will be coming soon. That is all I have tonight.
Friday night?
Friday night?
Concert?
Friday night, June 7th. We will have a concert downtown. That's right. Friday, June 7th. Come out, enjoy bands, food, and fun on Main Street.
Thank you, Ms. Wood, and your staff for getting this together. And I know we got a little ways to go, but we're going to make it happen. Is there anything else? I need one more. I need a motion to adjourn. Mr. Huff, second by Mr. Reeves. All in favor? We are adjourned.
Thank you, Council.